In 1935, American engineers built steam locomotives that were faster and more powerful than anything diesel could offer. The Milwaukee Hiawatha regularly outran cars on the highway. It set speed records that stood for decades. The Milwaukee Hiawatha represents the absolute pinnacle of steam technology. These were not just fast trains. They were potentially the fastest steam locomotives ever built. But 87 years later, every single one was destroyed. In 1935, the Burlington Railroad shocked everyone. Their new Zephyr diesel raced from Denver to Chicago in 13 hours. That was insane speed for passenger service. Every railroad boss in America was watching. If diesel could beat steam on speed, it would be game over. Milwaukee Road had two choices: give up on steam and follow everyone else, or prove that American steam could beat anything diesel makers built. But here is what makes this story incredible. They did not just beat diesel. They may have built the fastest steam locomotives in history. Why did Milwaukee Road fight back with steam? They knew something others did not. Diesel might be flashy and new, but steam was not even close to its limits. Think about it like this. Diesel in 1934 was like the first iPhone. Pretty cool for what it was. But steam? Steam was like a supercomputer that nobody knew how to use yet. So what did they build? They built not one, but two different speed machines. First came the Class A locomotive in 1935. Only 4 were ever built. These were not your grandfather's steam engines. The Class A was a 442 Atlantic configuration. That made it the last Atlantic design built in America. Those driving wheels were 84 inches across. That's 7 feet of steel designed to devour miles at crazy speeds. Here is something that will blow your mind. Most steam engines in 1934 ran at 200 pounds of pressure per square inch. The Class A ran at 300 pounds per square inch. That's like comparing a garden hose to a fire truck. But Milwaukee was not done. In 1937, they built something even more powerful. 6 locomotives called the F7 class, 240 tons of steam-powered fury. Here, the mystery begins. What happened next entered railroad legend. 112.5 miles per hour, officially recorded. It was the first steam locomotive to break 110 miles per hour. A record that still stands as the fastest authenticated speed for regularly scheduled steam passenger service. This was a defining moment. The record. But here is what changed everything. You know the streamlined shell. It was not just for looks. Wind tunnel tests proved it cut air resistance by 20% at high speeds. Steam locomotives had always been limited by wind resistance. The Class A solved that problem, and the F7 locomotives that came later were even more aerodynamic. Now the story gets more interesting. The F7 locomotives introduced in 1937 were more powerful, more advanced. And according to some engineers who rode them, they hit 120, maybe 125 miles per hour. But here's the problem. Those speeds were never officially tested, never verified. It has been 87 years, and we still do not know if the F7s were the fastest steam locomotives ever built. The numbers we do know tell an incredible story. A standard locomotive made 2,500 horsepower. The Class A delivered 4,000 horsepower. That is 60% more power, with only 15% more weight. Power. The F7s were even more powerful. Some say they hit 4,500 horsepower. 0 to 60 miles per hour took just 90 seconds with a full passenger load. Most 1930s cars could not match that. Acceleration. The Class A was like putting a race car engine in a luxury sedan. The F7s were like putting a fighter plane engine in that same sedan. All the power you could imagine, wrapped in comfort and style that passengers loved. But building the perfect locomotive was only half the battle. The real test? When passengers climbed aboard and engineers opened the throttle on the Chicago to the Twin Cities route. What happened next proved American steam could compete with anything the modern world threw at it, and maybe set speed records that still stand today. May 29th, 1935, Chicago Union Station. The first Class A sits ready, steam pressure at 300 pounds per square inch. Passengers settling into orange and red luxury cars. And engineer Ed Nowak about to prove steam could change passenger travel forever. If you are over 50, your grandfather might have ridden this train. Chicago businessmen taking quarterly trips to Minneapolis. Families heading to Wisconsin lakes for vacation. Kids pressed against observation car windows, watching America blur past at impossible speeds. This was not just another train run. The entire future of steam hung in the balance. If the Hiawatha could not deliver, every railroad in America would dump steam for diesel. Millions in investment, thousands of jobs, America's proudest transportation technology, all riding on one train's performance. Why did the Hiawatha succeed where other steam trains failed? Milwaukee Road understood something crucial. Speed was not enough. You needed speed and comfort and reliability, all at once. What the Hiawatha delivered was revolutionary. A 6.5-hour schedule for 410 miles between Chicago and Minneapolis. That beat driving time by 2 hours and beat the old train schedule by 90 minutes. But here is what made it special. The Hiawatha held 100 miles per hour for over 200 miles of that trip. Not briefly, not as a stunt, as regular everyday passenger service. Think about this. You could board a steam train in Chicago and travel faster than you can drive that same route today with 1935 technology, using coal and water. And on certain runs, when conditions were perfect and engineers felt adventurous, the Class A locomotives hit 112.5 miles per hour. Officially recorded. The fastest, regularly scheduled steam trains in world history. But the F7 locomotives that came later? Some engineers swear they hit 120 miles per hour. Maybe 125 miles per hour. The problem is, Milwaukee Road never officially tested them. So we will never know for sure. Imagine that. The fastest steam locomotives ever built. And their true top speed died with the men who drove them. But could this system handle real-world disasters? July 20th, 1940 would answer that question, and it would create a legend. Engineer Ed Nowak faced every railroad man's nightmare. Mechanical failure put the Hiawatha 30 minutes behind, between Milwaukee and Chicago. 30 minutes might not sound like much, but the Hiawatha's reputation lived on punctuality. Business travelers chose rail over cars because trains were reliable. One late arrival could destroy years of trust. Nowak made a decision that entered railroad legend. He opened the throttle wide and kept it there. For 85 miles, the F7 locomotive held speeds over 110 miles per hour. Some say it hit 115 miles per hour, through curves posted for 80 miles per hour. It passed stations in an orange and red blur, and passengers were pressed back in their seats. The locomotive never wavered. The machinery sang like a fine watch. The Hiawatha rolled into Chicago Union Station exactly on time. Regular service numbers proved the concept worked. In regular service, sustained speeds ranged from 100 to 110 miles per hour on level track, day after day. Acceleration from 0 to 60 miles per hour took 90 seconds with a full passenger load. On-time performance was 98.5% over 5 years of service. Load factors were over 80% during peak seasons. But here's what shocked the railroad industry. Faster schedules actually cut operating costs per passenger mile. Higher speeds meant more trips per day. More trips meant better equipment use. Better use meant higher profits. Steam was not just competing with diesel. It was beating diesel at diesel's own game and doing it faster. Diesel streamliners of the 1930s topped out around 85 to 90 miles per hour in regular service. Steam was actually faster. But diesel had one advantage steam could not overcome. The Hiawatha was proving steam could compete in the modern world. It was faster than diesel. Passengers loved it. But while Milwaukee Road perfected steam technology, their competitors were placing massive orders for equipment that was different, slower, but cheaper, and that would change railroad economics forever. It is 1946. The war is over. America is booming. Railroad executives across the country opened manila folders containing numbers that would destroy the steam industry, even steam that was faster than anything else on rails. These were not performance numbers. Steam still won on speed and power. The Hiawatha could hit 110 plus miles per hour regularly. Diesel streamliners topped out around 85 to 90 miles per hour. Steam was actually faster. These were cost reports showing something terrifying. Operating expenses could bankrupt even successful railroads. The Hiawatha was making record passenger revenue. But behind the glamour, accountants discovered that technical perfection came with a price tag no railroad could afford long term. Why were other railroads dumping faster steam for slower diesel? They were learning something Milwaukee Road was about to discover the hard way. In business, the best engineering solution is not always the most profitable one. Speed does not matter if you cannot afford to run the trains. Speed is meaningless without sustainable finances. What happened across the industry was a revolution that caught steam supporters completely off guard. Burlington Zephyr evolved into a fleet of diesel streamliners. Santa Fe's Super Chief set new luxury standards. The Pennsylvania Railroad was buying diesel as fast as makers could deliver. These were not faster trains. The Hiawatha could outrun any of them, but they were cheaper to operate, much cheaper. Here is a number that will shock you. By 1947, over 60% of new locomotive orders were diesel. Steam had dominated American railroads for over a century. It was abandoned in just 5 years for technology that was actually slower. Milwaukee Road's accounting department completed a full cost comparison of the Hiawatha service and Burlington's diesel Zephyr on comparable routes. Remember, the Hiawatha was faster, capable of 110 miles per hour plus. The Zephyr topped out around 85 miles per hour. The results were brutal. Operating cost per passenger mile for the Hiawatha was 12 cents. For the Zephyr, 8 cents. That is a 50% difference. On routes carrying 200,000 passengers a year, that translated into $800,000 in extra costs every single year for trains that were actually faster. But here is what really killed steam. It was not just direct costs. It was a hidden infrastructure burden most people never considered. Infrastructure that slower diesel did not need. Diesel was mechanically simpler. Fewer moving parts meant fewer breakdowns. It did not matter that diesel was slower. Steam became like a Formula One car competing against pickup trucks for daily transportation. Faster and more sophisticated, and completely impractical for everyday economics. The writing was on the wall by 1948, but Milwaukee Road leadership was reading a different book. While competitors ordered slower but cheaper diesel by the dozen, Milwaukee Road was about to make a decision that would waste millions in investment to keep building the fastest trains in the world that nobody could afford to run. On March 15, 1948, in the Milwaukee Road boardroom in Chicago, 2 purchase orders sat on the table. One was for slower diesel streamliners to modernize the passenger fleet. One was for the final batch of faster F7 steam locomotives. Guess which they signed first? This was not just buying equipment. It was a BET on the future of American passenger transportation. Get it right. Milwaukee Road stays competitive for decades. Get it wrong, they would watch their passenger business disappear to competitors who chose cheaper over faster. The clock was ticking. Every month of delay meant more passengers switching to other railroads offering slower but more frequent diesel service. Remember, Milwaukee had the fastest passenger trains in the world, with regular 100 miles per hour plus operation and potential F7 speeds of 120 miles per hour plus. But speed was about to lose to economics. Why did Milwaukee Road executives keep betting on faster steam when evidence clearly favored cheaper diesel? They fell into a trap that destroys many successful companies, confusing technical superiority with business advantage. The engineering department presented data. F7 locomotives were the finest steam power ever built, potentially the fastest as well. Performance reports showed passenger satisfaction was higher on Hiawatha runs than on any competing service. The accounting department presented cost analyses. Slower diesel operation would cut expenses by 40%. Market research showed competitor services gaining passengers with cheaper, more frequent diesel trains. Management chose to believe speed mattered more than cost. They were wrong about cost. It is mind-blowing. Milwaukee Road executives had access to the same financial data that convinced every other major railroad to buy slower diesel. They saw the same numbers, but reached the opposite conclusion. They chose speed over economics. In transportation, that choice is usually wrong. Here is the decision that sealed their fate. You will not believe the timing. In April 1948, Milwaukee Road placed an order for more F7 locomotives, potentially the fastest steam engines ever built. The cost was $2 million, with delivery scheduled for December 1948. In the same month, they approved preliminary talks with diesel manufacturers for future streamliner service. Too little, too late. The decision was sealed. By December 1948, when those final F7 locomotives arrived, 3 competing railroads had already launched slower but cheaper diesel streamliner service on parallel routes. The market had moved to economics over speed. Here is the ultimate irony. Those final F7 locomotives may have been the fastest steam engines in history, capable of 120 miles per hour plus. They entered service just as passengers were choosing slower trains that cost less to ride. Here is what explains everything. Milwaukee Road executives were not stupid or incompetent. They were victims of the speed trap that catches many transportation companies. When do you build the fastest machines in the world? It is almost impossible to believe customers will choose slower alternatives. Speed represented decades of expertise, millions in investment, and the source of their competitive advantage. Abandoning the fastest steam for slower diesel meant admitting their core skill was becoming worthless. But here is the cruel irony. The faster they made steam technology, the harder it became to abandon it for slower diesel. Every speed improvement was more evidence they were on the right track. The end came quickly once economics beat speed. In 1951, the first slower diesel streamliners entered Hiawatha service. In 1952, Milwaukee Road reported its first annual passenger loss. In 1954, steam locomotive shop facilities began closing. On January 4, 1955, the last steam-powered Hiawatha run took place. In 1958, all Class A and F7 locomotives were scrapped or sold for parts. It was 20 years from the 112.5 miles per hour speed record to the scrapyard. The fastest steam locomotives ever built had shorter lifespans than most cars. Milwaukee Road was like a Formula One team trying to compete in the taxi business. Their trains were the fastest, but nobody wanted to pay Formula One prices for taxi rides. The fastest steam locomotives ever built lasted barely 20 years in service, but their legacy extends far beyond their brief operational life. What the Hiawatha taught America about speed versus economics would influence transportation decisions for decades. and that speed record controversy is still not resolved. In 1964, Tokyo, Japan, a team of engineers studies detailed reports about American high-speed rail operation. They are not looking at modern diesel trains. They are analyzing Milwaukee Road's Hiawatha service from the 1930s and the 1940s. Why would Japanese bullet train designers care about 87-year-old American steam locomotives? Because those steam locomotives achieved something modern trains still struggle with. Regular 100+ miles per hour operation. Authenticated 112.5 miles per hour service speeds. And claimed F7 speeds that might have reached 125 miles per hour. Why did the Hiawatha's legacy extend far beyond its operational life? It proved three fundamental principles that still guide transportation planning today. First, high-speed wheel design. Those 84-inch driving wheels showed optimal proportions for sustained triple-digit operation. Modern high-speed trains still use similar wheel to track relationships. Second, aerodynamic streamlining that actually improve performance instead of just looks. Wind tunnel testing of Class A and F7 locomotives influenced streamlined design for decades. Third, precision engineering standards showed how mechanical systems could operate reliably at extreme speeds. Metallurgy and balancing techniques developed for Hiawatha were adapted for diesel and electric locomotives. Here is something that will surprise you. Hiawatha's operational techniques were more advanced than many modern passenger trains. Schedule precision, maintenance standards, crew training procedures. American railroads did not match these until Amtrak's high-speed Acela service in 2000. Here is a connection that shows how far Hiawatha's influence reached. You will not believe this story. In 1964, Hideo Shima, chief engineer of Japan's Shinkansen project, reviewed American high-speed rail experience. His team studied Hiawatha's operational data more carefully than any other American service. Why? Hiawatha had solved problems the Shinkansen would face. High-speed operation with multiple daily frequencies. Passenger comfort at sustained triple-digit speeds. Schedule reliability business travelers could depend on. When the first Shinkansen trains entered service in 1964, their operational philosophy closely matched Hiawatha's approach. Maximum speed was balanced with reliability, comfort, and economic sustainability. Top speed was 130 miles per hour, only 5 to 20 miles per hour faster than steam locomotives built 27 years earlier. Washington, D.C., 1999. Amtrak engineers designed America's first true high-speed rail service. Acela Express would operate between Boston and Washington at speeds up to 150 miles per hour. During the planning phase, they studied historical American high-speed operations. The most useful data came from Milwaukee Road's Hiawatha service records, passenger load factors, schedule reliability standards, and maintenance requirements that proved sustainable over multiple years of operation. Hiawatha's operational model, refined with modern technology, became the foundation for America's return to high-speed passenger rail. Today, only one Hiawatha-era locomotive survives. Milwaukee Road number 261, a Hudson-class locomotive similar to the legendary Class A and F7 speed machines. It ran excursions in 2025, carrying passengers who remember the original orange and red Hiawatha trains. Hiawatha was like a prototype that proved the concept worked, even though production versions used different technology. Ideas survived even when implementation changed, and speed records that may never be broken. And that F7 speed mystery, 87 years later, we still do not know if America built the fastest steam locomotives in history. Maybe we never will.